Welcome back to Roll Pod, everybody, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin. I am here with just Alex Scarborough. This week, Mike Rodak is on vacation, so it's just Alex and I. Going to be talking ragtag collection of topics here. It's the off season. It's June 19th as we're recording this, so not a lot in the way of news, and we're kind of saving some of our previews for next month ahead of SEC Media Days, after SEC Media Days, ahead of fall camp that'll begin in early August. But just a couple of newsy notebook-type items here that Alex and I are going to go back and forth. I wanted to start here, Alex. It was revealed to us through an interview that defensive lineman LT Overton had with the Crimson Tide Sports Network, I believe, last week, that Kalen DeBoer, Alabama's new head football coach, has Snapchat. It begs the question, who on Alabama's roster do we think Kalen DeBoer has the longest Snapchat streak with?
Oh, that's a good question. First, I resent just Alex being my intro. That's not cool. Come on, man. We're not snapping each other here. I'm guessing, Kalen coached a little O-line. I could see him being really tight with those guys. Parker Brailsford has a lot of history there. Caden Proctor back in the program. I'm leaning there, but I want to know if he has, he built what is it called, the Memoji thing? Does he have his own caricature of himself? Does he text? Does he snap in with you, just the one letter instead of YOU? What's his style?
How does he text?
Yeah, that's what we need to know.
These are the important, hard-hitting questions that we ask in the off season. I thought it was funny because I think it was, Rodak ended up writing the story DeBoer and Saban, the more we have learned about DeBoer, which admittedly not too much, right? I think I've said on multiple shows and in conversations, he's kind of boring, which can be good and bad. He's also the polar opposite of Nick Saban. Nick Saban's writing his first emails, a couple months after he retires. And meanwhile, Kalen DeBoer has Snapchat and the players are just thrown for a total loop of going from one coach to the other. I know Overton didn't necessarily play for Saban, but he did commit to him through the transfer portal. And so these are the fun little details. We may not know a whole lot about DeBoer, but some of these other small things that start to come out a little bit, I'll probably ask that question at SEC Media Days. Hey, DeBoer really does have Snapchat. What's his Bitmoji look like? Who's got the longest streak? How does he text? These are, I don't know. I feel like the fan base might eat some of that up after literally consuming anything and everything Saban did the last 17 years.
Absolutely. And it's a stark departure. And it reminds me, I was talking to Jeff Tedford, who he worked for at Fresno. And he did bring up on his own, that DeBoer was kind of ahead of the curve and into the social media part. And he really understands how everything sort of fits together. You need to have that line of communication. You need to be active when it comes to recruiting. When you're Nick Saban, you can kind of stand above all that and just say, count my rings. I'm cool. When you're Kalen DeBoer and you're introducing yourself in a lot of ways, you do have to be a little bit more active in those areas. And I think it does speak to the intentionality of what he does. But yeah, also curious what it looks like in the not, PR way. Clearly not going to be a Lane Kiffin on social media, which thank God for us as reporters. But nonetheless, pretty interesting.
we don't know that yet. He's got a Twitter account. He's tweeting. He's got an Instagram account.
But tweets are X's, whatever you call them now. Posts you can't see likes anymore. So that cuts down pretty heavily on what we have to look into as reporters.
One of the topics that I wanted to discuss with you today, Alex, this news dropped last week. Big 12 Conference is exploring naming rights possibilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars, presented by Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark. Again, this was last week, is expected to generate multiple millions of dollars per school annually. And it comes at a time when college athletic departments are seeking varying revenue streams or different revenue streams ahead of the new revenue sharing model, right? Starting in 2025, Power Conference schools will be allowed to share as much as $20 or $22 million with their athletes as part of the consolidation of 3 antitrust cases. The prospect of having to pay athletes has schools really kind of more aggressive in exploring this type of commercialization to basically try and line their pocketbook so that they can figure out how to pay these athletes, how to keep their athletic departments upright, how to hopefully, fingers crossed, not cut sports, right? Some schools are also exploring private equity, private capital plans. Many are hoping will probably display corporate sponsor patches either on jerseys, on fields. Like, there's just the commercialization of college sports is just continuing, and the Big 12 kind of made a lot of news by really kind of being the first conference to outwardly say, hey, this is something that we're looking into. I'm curious, do you have any initial thoughts on this, the development as a whole, and just where college sports are trending in terms of commercialization?
Yeah, I'm going to start off by pointing out what a hypocrite I am by wearing this hat. If you're not watching on the pod, it says the All-State Sugar Bowl, not just the Sugar Bowl. So, and I'm fine with it. Obviously, I'm wearing the hat. I hate everything about what is happening in the Big 12. I hate that they're using the Big 10 and the SEC as a boogeyman to do whatever they need to, quote unquote, to keep up with them in terms of revenue and hold their conference together. I think the idea of private equity could ruin everything. College athletics is not a well-run business. They wouldn't be in this situation if they were. And now you're going to take money with the idea that you're going to have a return on your investment. Yeah, I don't know about that. And then to sell away history by saying, not saying it's the, again, we'll use All-State example, the All-State Big 12 Conference. I can kind of live with that a little bit. To call it the All-State 12,
That's weird.
that's weird and kind of, yeah, it's kind of insulting to everybody who cares about conferences. And that's a lot of college football for a long time. And I know I sound like an old man when I say this, but we've all been to games in the SEC where you chant SEC. There is such a thing as conference pride. What are they going to chant? All State Conference. No, there's no ring to it. Part of what makes college football special are these weird quirks. It is the fact that people care about conferences and wear that with pride. I got a buddy of mine who still has a Southwest Conference hat. To this day, he wears all the time. He misses it dearly and cares about conferences. And we care about the fact that it's called Bryant Denny Stadium and not Golden Flake Stadium. It's not the NFL. It shouldn't be. Even the NFL isn't so bold as to name divisions after corporate sponsors. It just
Don't give Roger any ideas.
Yeah. But it just feels like once you've squeezed every ounce of revenue out of something, what's left? Like, honestly, what's left of the sport that we all kind of care about? Because then it's just amateur football. Then you're just comparing it to the NFL. And if that's all it is, it's not going to look great. It just worries me where this sport is headed. And it makes me mad when I think about the fact that a lot of this feels like the responsibility of athletic departments for years and really for generations of just having runaway spending, no accountability, never really thinking ahead. Like, if you just had a little bit of business sense and plan for things, we wouldn't probably be in this situation. And instead of trying to really rethink the model, what you're going to do is try to hold on to it as much as you can by getting all this money. Like, that's what you're doing. You're saying, oh, crud, we've got X million dollars of expenses. We've got to bring X million of dollars in. Instead of saying, why do we have 50 people in our athletic department? Why do we do this and that? Why do we take these, leadership retreats and all these things that have become part of the ecosystem? Break apart the ecosystem, see what actually makes sense, how you can scale it down to make it work, instead of just holding on to what was there before by reaching out for money that you don't know what the strings are attached, whether that's letting down fans, which they're supposed to care about, or for their own purposes, being beholden to stakeholders in your company who are going to want a return investment one way or another. It feels like an icky thing that I'm just very turned off by.
Yeah, I worry about the private equity avenue because of, like, if they don't flip a profit, that's literally the only reason that private equity would get into it, right? Is to flip a quick profit and then get out and then whatever, move on. The naming rights thing doesn't bother me as much, although it would be kind of goofy to see it as like the All-State 12. I think most people, us included, like your hat, for example, the All-State Sugar Bowl, that's plastered everywhere, all over the broadcast. It's plastered everywhere. Like that's, all the corporate sponsors that have to deal with it. We just call it the Sugar Bowl. Like we don't call it the Rose Bowl game presented by whatever. Like we just called it the Rose Bowl.
Unless
I feel like a
you
lot
worked
of
at
more,
ESPN like me and you had to. There's
well,
a peek behind the curtain, but go ahead.
right. So, how does that change with, CBS now doing a lot more Big Ten stuff? I don't know. But I feel like more often than not, like people will still recognize the Big 12 as the Big 12, even if it becomes the Big 12 presented by Allstate or, the SEC presented by Coca-Cola, right? Because they're in Atlanta or whatever the case may be. I'm generally, I hope it saves sports, man. That's my big thing. Like, and that's, wrestling, that's my thing. That was my sport, still is my sport. A lot of smaller programs, not just wrestling programs, but a lot of Olympic non-revenue generating sports, I think could be in danger if schools and conferences don't take this step. And there's a lot of truth to the idea that like a lot of these athletic departments operated in the same way for so long that they've dug themselves into this hole. And there are going to be sports that even if they do become the All-State 12, that are not going to be saved. And that's a huge bummer. And so like, I guess I can appreciate the athletic directors and the school presidents and the chancellors exploring literally anything and everything possible to save all this or to save these sports, to save these opportunities for these athletes. That's really the biggest thing that I'm kind of worried about with, where's all the money going? What is college sports going to look like? Because football and basketball are great, but I don't want to give the NCAA too much credit, but a lot of their national championship events, even if they don't flip a profit, man, they're fun, right? Like the College World Series is going on right now. It's been a fantastic Final Eight, but it's really been a fun tournament to watch all the way through. Same thing with softball. March Madness every year, men's and women's have been great. Again, NCAA wrestling championships, for my money, best 3 days in sports. I don't want to see any of that go away. And so if that means naming them the All-State 12 or the SEC presented by whatever, I think I'll live with it. Personally, that's just me. I would prefer them go that route than the private equity route. But I don't know. Those are my thoughts. That's what I'm most worried about.
A pessimist in me who's watched hedge funds come in and gut companies over and over, and we've seen it in newspapers all the time, right? Is the idea that they're going to come in and do these things to save the greater product. They never do that. Never happens. So my fear is that they're going to do all these things to save other sports, and then other sports are still going to go away. Because the bottom line will be, we're used to creating X millions of dollars in revenue. Anything below that is they're going to have a hard time stomaching. So they're going to cut. That's what you do. It feels like it's a step toward, it's maybe delaying the process a little bit, but I think that process is still going to have to continue. And they're going to have athletic directors, conference commissioners, on and on down the line are going to have to look at ways to be efficient and to have a model that works for sports that don't generate revenue. Whether it's, it hurts for some people to say it, but to shift to a club sort of model, maybe a hybrid of that when it comes to these non-revenue generating sports. And then if you're an athletic department, say it works at Alabama too, and Alabama or Oklahoma, and you really care about softball, figure out a way to make softball work in the way you want it to work. Basketball, football, they're going to work. We've seen women's basketball grow. If you market it, if you care about it, if you feed it, you can make it work. But they're going to have to be tough decisions ahead. And instead of throwing money at the problem, I think you have to really look at what the problem is and how to actually fix it.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder who are the ADs that are going to lead that charge? Who are the ones that are going to make the tough decisions, but decisions that might be better in the long run, even if they hurt in the short term? I don't know. It's going to be one of the many interesting things to follow when it comes to college sports. I mean, really over the next 5 years, maybe a decade or so. So I don't know. There's a lot of different types of fruit to pick off of that tree, that particular conversation. I am curious though, to end this tough conversation on a lighter note. What do you think would be a good corporate name for the SEC?
That's a good question. What's a good you keep it with the Saban family and call it like the Aflac conference.
Nah.
They're so used to that. I mean, really, you just call it the ESPN conference because that's where all the money's coming from, right? I mean, honestly, you have the ESPN conference, you have the Fox conference, and then you have the what is the Big 12 on some the CW? I don't know what they're on all the time. I know it's
A
Fox.
lot of their a lot of their smaller sports were on ESPN, some like
Yeah,
ESPN Plus, like Big 12 Now on ESPN
they're
Plus.
kind of everywhere now. So they're the
Yeah.
streaming conference. I don't know what you call it, but
Yeah.
I maybe ESPN's the most direct line through. I don't know. What do you think?
I would think like regionality would make a lot of sense. So like Coca-Cola is based in Atlanta. That makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
right? Like the SEC presented by Coca-Cola or the
What do
Coca-Cola.
we drink at media days? Dr. Pepper.
But like I always associate Dr. Pepper with the Big 12 for whatever reason, even though they have that halftime show at like half of the conference championship games. I think there's a really funny opportunity for Pacific Life to come in and sponsor the ACC. I think that'd be great. I don't know. See, like the naming rights thing doesn't really bother me because I think it was what Big Ten has had at least 11 teams in it for the duration of my lifetime. So like the names have always been weird anyway. So like, why not just make them even weirder?
Well,
Uh,
what's weird is like the SEC can focus on regionality, right? The other conferences doesn't really apply anymore because you're talking about the Big Ten. Well, you've got USC and UCLA just sitting out there. In the ACC, you've got SMU. It's just all over the place. The cynic in me says it's all going to be named like the Bet MGM conference, and it's just going to be some form of betting in each conference, which is going to strike a weird dynamic because they're telling everyone on the field, no, 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 don't bet, but your conference is named after you. But so no, but don't do that.
I think both Iowa and Iowa State would take exception to any sort of like betting company that takes over a conference name.
They take
Because their
exception
athletes
if
had
they
to
got
go
the
through the
check.
muck there.
Yeah, then they get the check and they'd be okay. We can live with that.
Yeah, right. Like that's money solved a lot of issues. Interesting conversation there with commercialization and naming rights possibilities. I imagine that drumbeat's going to get louder and louder, especially as we close in on SEC Media Days, and then really over the next couple of years as these conference commissioners and school presidents and chancellors try to figure out what to do. To flip the conversation to the SEC specifically, we are in the midst of the offseason, but there was one thing that I wanted to touch on here. Our own Brad Crawford at 247, an expert in the offseason content game, recently revealed his full team-by-team predictions for the 2024 SEC football season. He picked the records for all 16 teams, even mapped out their projected finish, who'd they lose to, tiebreakers, all that good stuff. Again, an expert in the offseason content game. He has Alabama finishing 10-2 overall, 6-2 against the SEC, which would put them in a 5-way tie for second place. He has them losing to Georgia and Tennessee. Let's start with Alabama before we look at the rest of the conference. 10-2, 6-2, losses to Georgia and Tennessee. Georgia would be at home. Tennessee would be in Knoxville. 5-way tie for second place. Yay, nay, buy, sell, agree, disagree? What do we think?
It doesn't feel that far off. I think 10 wins during the regular season is probably a success. The question is whether that 5-way tie equates to them being in an SEC championship game. I don't have the story in front of me, so I don't know if you can tell me that. But the Georgia game is obviously the one that everybody's going to look at and say, if you're going to lose one, that's going to be it. Again, I'm sort of skeptical on Tennessee. The fact that it's on the road does make me think that that's a losable game, quote unquote. But that feels about right. If you slip into the 3-loss area and then you get a little bit murky, I think 10-2 feels good to me. It's just I think you're probably giving a little bit of credit to some of those other teams that are also going to finish 10-2 because I think there could be more muck around the LSU, Ole Miss teams. Maybe have a spoiler in Florida. I don't think there are going to be that many double-digit win programs. I think might be more closer to 500 than in that sense. So I think the talent is pretty evenly dispersed in a lot of ways, maybe with the exception of Georgia. But I see some spoilers out there. Auburn, even, I think, they almost upset a couple teams last year. So I think 10-2 feels right for Alabama. I don't know if it's a 5-way tie at 10-2. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think 10 wins is a successful season. I think in a normal world, 10 wins for Alabama, I think, probably puts them in the playoff.
Yeah.
I don't think that there will be a 5-way tie for second place where there are 5 teams that go 10-2, and then Brad picked Texas to go 11-1 and win the regular season title. And then I believe, based on his tiebreakers, Texas Ole Miss in the SEC championship game. So we'll see. But yeah, I think
to be clear, who are the 5 teams that are 10-2?
Okay, here's who he's got at the top of the conference. Texas, number 1, 11-1, 7-1 in the SEC. He has them losing to A&M. The 5-way tie for second: Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU. He has them all going 10-2 overall and 6-2 in the conference. And there's a collection of teams beating other teams. So he's got Ole Miss beating Georgia. He's got Georgia losing to Texas and Ole Miss, Tennessee losing to Georgia and Oklahoma, Alabama losing to Georgia and Tennessee, LSU losing to Alabama and Florida. Then he's got A&M and Mizzou both going 9-3, 5-3 in the conference.
I don't disagree on sort of the numbers. I think Georgia is a considerably better team than Texas. We could argue about the schedules and how that maps out, but I think there are question marks around Texas that I think people are kind of just brushing away. Who steps up at receiver, at tight end, how they transition to the SEC. We've talked about that kind of stuff before.
Right.
I think Georgia's a more complete program than any program in the SEC this year. And when we talk about Ole Miss beating Georgia, maybe I'm just I'm coloring in from last season. I don't see it because Georgia crushed Ole Miss last year. Like, just took their soul out of their body, because they came into Athens feeling like they were a program. They came out having to rethink where they were. And to Lane Griffin's credit, they didn't crumble. But at the same time, I don't know how Ole Miss wins the line of scrimmage against a team that is recruited as well as Georgia has for as long as it has. I think Georgia's that team that I would more put 11-1 and flip Texas into that field of 5.
The Ole Miss one is curious, even though they did a lot of work in the portal. The 2 biggest games that they had last year, Alabama and Georgia, they lost those 2 games by a combined 50 points. They couldn't do anything against Alabama. Like, Alabama's defense just blanked one of the best offenses in the country. And then Georgia, like you mentioned, literally just steamrolled them. So,
and they added Walter Nolan on defensive line. I'm sure they added an offensive lineman or 2. I don't have the full list because it's like 20-something transfers.
A lot of their portal ads were, I think they picked up Logan Diggs from LSU, so they got him at running back after Quinshon Judkins left for Ohio State. But a lot of their portal ads were defense, right? Like Walter Nolan, Princely, I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name, the edge rusher from Florida, Trey Amos from Alabama, cornerback, who I really like. Can you portal a defense as opposed to an offensive line? I guess Ole Miss is going to be the guinea pigs for that.
And I'm just, and this is a bigger conversation, but when you portal that much, and I know why Lane's doing it, I get it. There's a ceiling you can hit in terms of high school recruiting at Ole Miss, but when you go that heavy into free agency, chemistry is the thing you lose. Development's the thing you lose, and you see it in the NFL all the time. When you go that heavy in free agency, you don't win.
Right.
You win the offseason, but you don't win a championship. So it's an experiment he's running there, and I don't think he's wrong for trying it. I'm just very dubious of how do you bring all of these disparate players together, because it's not just 20-something players this year; it's 20-something last year too, and a lot of turnover. Granted, you keep both coordinators, you have an experienced quarterback. There's a lot to like, but all that turnover, all those new faces, they worry me in terms of how that plays out during the course of the season.
He's also got Oklahoma going 8-4, 4-4. I know we talked about this on one of the previous shows. Man, if Oklahoma goes 8-4, I think I said this on the last show. They go 8-4, they better be partying in Norman, because that would be a heck of a performance. He's also got Auburn going 8-4, which you look at their schedule, I can see it, but that's you're betting on a pretty big jump year 1 to year 2 under Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, you're thinking that Peyton Thorne becomes a demonstrably better quarterback by adding freshman receivers. Maybe it happens because those freshmen are more talented than the guys they had last year, but I think it's asking a lot. And I think the offensive line last year at Auburn overperformed, and I think there's a chance that they come back to earth a little bit. They lose some key pieces on defense. The schedule's not that bad. But at the same time, I still think that for Auburn, the year is 2025, not 2024, for them to really compete.
Of the five-way second place tie here, the 5-10 win teams in the SEC that Brad has projected, we know we both like Georgia. We'll exclude Alabama from this. So between Ole Miss, Tennessee, and LSU, which one do you think has the best chance of actually getting to the 10-win plateau in 2024?
Oh, that's a good question because the schedule for Ole Miss and the talent they have on paper says that they should get there. Tennessee maybe bounces back with a quarterback. It's tough. I don't really know how to choose because of the issues I want to say LSU because for so long we're used to LSU performing at such a high level. But at the same time, I think what they lost on offense, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, three of the best offensive players in college football last year, and a defense that just could not play football at times. And I don't think we'll turn around that dramatically. I think all three of those teams have the widest variance in terms of ceiling and floor. So it's really hard for me to pick, to be honest with you.
I think I like Ole Miss
Yeah.
probably because of the schedule. I think if Tennessee gets to 10 wins next season, and Brad's got them losing to Oklahoma and Georgia, the Georgia one I see probably losing to Oklahoma because that game's in Norman, and you got a young quarterback, so we'll see what happens. If Tennessee gets to 10 wins this year, like that's probably a year ahead of schedule. Like, not saying that Tennessee and Auburn are on the same timeline, but like I feel like Tennessee is another 2025 team. So it's like, can you take the necessary steps forward this year to set yourself up for 2025? If they get to 10 wins this year, that just expectations explode for 2025, I would think, for Tennessee, just given the talent that they've got in and how they're able to accumulate more. And just, they've got the quarterback, right? Like 10 wins means Nico balled out this year.
Yeah.
And that would just, that would be crazy. LSU, I think I said this on the past show, like, I got to see it from Nussmeier first, man. Like, I think I know that Brian Kelly is going to reload and they're going to have talent there, and they did well in the portal, and Kyron Lacey's still there. I just got to see it. The fact that Brad has them losing to Florida tells me a little bit, right? Like, that's
And Florida's going to be, it's weird. Their schedule is just going to, Billy's going to take a miracle to survive this. But I think they're a better program talent wise than they were last year. But so I could see them upsetting an LSU. And you're right. Nussmeier's going to have to prove it. I love his arm. I love the fact that he's got two of the best tackles in college football. Um, I love pieces of it. I'm just very dubious of whether they're going to actually get it done. And Ole Miss is the team that's all in. So if it doesn't work, if they don't reach 10 wins and they don't therefore reach the playoff, it's going to be a lot of explaining to do because of the money they spent in the portal and the way they pushed all their chips in for this year because they really went for it in a big way. And again, you should do it, but the pressure if they lose an early game or two is going to be really high.
Another expert in the offseason content game, our own Chris Hummer, wrote out a list of the 100 true freshman players that he believes will impact or influence the 2024 season. He listed 4 Alabama players. I'm sure you can guess who they are. The 4 5-stars: Xavier Brown, Jalen Mbakwe, Zay Mincy, all 3 defensive backs, and then Ryan Williams at receiver. High expectations on all 4 of these guys. The question I pose to you, Alex, who do you think will have the biggest impact of the 4 that Hummer listed here?
It's difficult because my head says it's probably going to be one of the DBs because of the opportunity that's there in terms of the overhaul of the secondary. My gut says it's Ryan Williams. My gut says that dude can play and speed and run after the catch translates. And on top of all of that, there is opportunity there because while there's numbers at that position and returning talent, there's not returning talent with experience. There's not a lot of entrenched players already. So I could very easily see him while he's one of the last to arrive as a summer enrollee, not an early enrollee. He's got a lot of catching up to do, playbook wise, chemistry wise with quarterback, body type wise, getting in the weight room. I just think that, that dude can play. And I think while this staff is very careful is going to be very careful about not putting high expectations on him, I think they would not be surprised if he could play. I think they know what a talent he is. And if you get him to work out, I think everybody else falls into place. So I think I'd probably go with Ryan Williams.
I tend to agree. Of the DBs, I think specifically Zabian Brown. The guy ran with the first team defense wire to wire basically through spring ball. Maybe not as athletically gifted as Jalen Mbakwe or Zay Mincy, but very technically sound. Like he's the typical DB that Nick Saban looked for. He decided to stick around, I think probably because he saw a lot of the opportunity that's going to be available to him. I wonder too, like Kane Womack's defense, more that spot drop zone type defense, keeping your eyes on the quarterback, limiting big plays. I wonder if that's going to make the transition for not just Brown, but for all these guys, maybe a little bit easier, like not nearly as complex as Nick Saban's defense. I think they would have preferred to learn from Nick Saban. No offense to Kane Womack. But like I do wonder if the style of defense that Kane Womack's going to ask of these guys is maybe going to help them with the transition a little bit more, just so that they can maybe pick up the speed a little bit. But I like Zabian Brown as like a guy that, could play early, could play often. A lot of our talent evaluators at 247, very, very high on this guy, very high on all of them. But I tend to agree with you that like Ryan Williams may be the most important of the four, just because of, you think about Kalen DeBoer and the offense he ran at Washington and even at Fresno. And, can they do, maybe not an exact carbon copy, but can they do a lot of the same things with Alabama? Like they've got a returning quarterback with experience. They've got dudes in the receiver room. They brought in Jeremy Bernard, who knows the playbook. If they can find a way to utilize Ryan Williams, I agree with you. I think it ties a lot of things together with the receiver room, because going into this season, and I think we'll touch on this a little bit too with the last thing that we're going to talk about, but I have no idea how they're going to use these receivers. Like, I have no idea, and it's like easy to look at like Washington, and this is not fair, right? Because Washington had 3 top 100 draft picks playing receiver for them last year, and then the number 8 overall pick in Michael Penix Jr. throwing them the ball. Like, not exactly the same personnel. I think we all presume that we can probably lightly pencil in Jeremy Bernard as like the alpha of the group. I think we all assumed that had Jalen Hale not gotten injured, he's your outside X guy, maybe. And then, that kind of helps solidify the picture a little bit. But without Hale and not knowing exactly how they're going to use Ryan Williams, I'm going to sit back and I'm just going to wait to see what it looks like first before I'm like, okay, I get it now, because I don't know. I have no idea.
We'll talk about where the receivers fit a little bit more later. You're right, but one thing I did want to say is I think there's a 5th freshman that in the secondary might by the time it's all said and done have more of an impact, which is Red Morgan. I think he has that. Yeah, I think he has a chance at that Husky position to make an impact. I like Devontae Smith. I love the fact that he has worked his way through the program, had a real rough go of it last year with the injury, came back and has the right mindset. But anytime you're that far along in the program and have not put together production and you have an injury in your background, makes me wonder a little bit about what it's going to look like going on the field. I think he starts off as the front runner at that Husky position with good reason. He could end the season there. But I think Red will have some looks. And we saw it in A-Day. Like, he played a lot. I think he's got some ability. And if he does wind up in that position, you're in a place to make a lot of plays. If you're not, the defense is in trouble. But I think he's a guy who has a chance, if things break a certain way, to make a really big impact as a freshman.
I like that, because he was another guy that I did notice on A-Day that just, not just the Husky position, but like, they used him behind Malachi Moore and Keon Sabb at the safety position. Him and Bray Hubbard, I thought they played fast. They weren't playing with the A guys, but they distinguished themselves on the field, at least just from my perspective and rewatching that game. It would not shock me to see, if they in a pinch need to put like Red Morgan out at safety and drop Malachi Moore maybe to that Husky role, just to sort some things out in a pinch mid-game. Like that's an option that they have there because of the versatility of their safeties.
Well, and the thing that complicates the picture in terms of projecting these freshmen is the additions via the portal, which is in the spring, which is what the staff absolutely had to do. But you get a King Mack, you get a Cam Howard, you get a Deshaun Jones. Deshaun's probably a cornerback purely. But King and Cam are guys with position versatility, or they appear to be. So can those guys come in the fall and make up a little bit of lost ground. They've got more experience, not in the program, but overall. Um, it's hard. So that's why it's a little bit hard for me to say where all these pieces fall because King, I know, got a lot of athleticism to him. I could see him climbing his way up the depth chart specifically. But yeah, it's that whole secondary. There's so few players returning, and even like a Malachi Moore, a guy who's returning, is playing a new position. So it's really hard to say who fits where. And that's why, like we've talked about, the fact that your first two games are winnable games against very interesting offenses that are going to put them in positions that are going to be difficult is probably a good thing because Kane and that defensive staff can really sort of see where guys are succeeding and failing before you get into the real meat of the schedule with Georgia and Wisconsin and on those games.
Yeah. Similar to, the receivers. I don't know what it's going to look like. Like, I think the secondary more so you can kind of lightly pencil in Malachi Moore and Keon Sabat, the two safety positions.
And Damani Jackson at a cornerback. I think he's there right now.
Right now. I need to see it. We'll see. But yeah, like that's, how they're going to use them. What's the rotation going to look like? What's the snap share look like, right? Like if they get up big on Western Kentucky, for example, like do we see more guys shuffle in the second half, or is that a game they're going to labor through all the way through? We have no idea. I'm excited to see these four freshmen because I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to play. How much are they going to play? That's I'm of the belief that Xavier Brown will probably play the most of the three defensive backs, but I could also Jalen Mbakwe is a dude that, similar to Williams, you get the ball in his hand, let him get in space. He can be a dynamic playmaker. That could be their punt return guy. Right? Like that's, or he could play on kick return. Like I know that's probably where Kendrick Law is going to be, but there are some things you can do there when you've got athletes like that. And if there's one thing Kalen DeBoer knows how to do, it's how to use and utilize and maximize talent anywhere on the field.
Well, and as we saw last year, it's good to have two or three guys at return because like Kool-Aid, incredibly talented, but just not consistent enough at that. So have multiple guys there. And I think you will. It'll be interesting I think it'll depend on how much they need Ryan Williams as a receiver, whether he's playing more on special teams, but he has that ability. It's just a matter of do they want to max him out as a true freshman. But no, I think you're right. We could see those guys in multiple roles potentially.
The one thing that does worry me about Ryan Williams, though, and I think I've said this, I'm going to continue to say it until I see otherwise, his size, man. Like 6'1", 6'1.5", like only 160 or 165. Like I hope he has spent his spring and the first part of his summer in the weight room, because you can't be my size and be effective in the SEC, even with DeBoer calling plays. Like it would make me feel a little bit better if the guy put on a little bit of muscle, and he's got the frame to do it. I just hope that he's a little bit bigger before he steps on the field, because he's a dynamic talent. But like if he's that size, one gnarly hit, like we've seen what happens in the SEC with one gnarly hit. Like it could be maybe not the end of a career, but like it could really stunt his productivity, his growth, his development.
Yeah, I had those concerns until a couple of months ago with Ryan, and I've been talked out of it enough by people who ought to know to kind of come back a little bit on it, because he does. And then you watch his tape, he doesn't look small on the field. He doesn't look like he's 6 even or whatever he's listed at. He doesn't look like he's 180 or whatever he's listed at. And when you watch him, more so than playing receiver and just going up and getting the ball, that's impressive enough. The thing that impressed me most was run after the catch, and when they had him in Wildcat, and his ability to run through tackles. And I understand the SEC is very different than high school. But he's playing at Saraland. He wasn't playing at, some.
It's a 6A football program. Yeah. Like those are big schools.
South Alabama, they play football. And for a guy his size, it was very impressive to see that. And you layer that on top of the fact that I think over the last 5-10 years, football has changed for receivers in terms of size needs. Like, remember the wideouts at Alabama? None of them were big. None of them. Henry Ruggs, small guy, a little thicker but small, short. Devontae Smith, tiny, Heisman winner. And Jerry Jeudy, a little taller but thin, and not super tall, not 6'4" or anything like that. Jalen Waddle, another guy. If you have speed, and more important than speed, short area burst and can run good routes in today's game of spread, in today's game where DBs can't just shoot like a missile at you anymore. Some of them do, but you're going to get thrown out of the game. Um, it is easier for a smaller receiver to succeed, I think. And sometimes those guys have a better off than the 6'4", 225 guy who doesn't move as well. So I think those two things combined, I think Ryan plays a little bit bigger than what his size is listed at, and the way the game is sort of shifted alleviates some of those concerns, which I think are valid, but I'm not as worried about them as you are.
You and I have both talked to people who are in the program who are uber excited, not just about Ryan Williams, but about the receiver room as a whole, right? And this is a coaching staff that, for as great as those receivers at Washington were last year, like they really had to work for a couple of years to develop those guys into what they ultimately became. And so now you're dealing with a receiver room that maybe has a little bit of a collective higher floor than where those guys started. So I imagine, Jamarcus Shepard specifically, but really just the offensive staff as a whole, really licking their chops about the opportunity to get these guys in their system, to get them to learn, to, figure out how they're going to use all these different chess pieces. Because again, I think I said this to Bud Elliott on Summer School. We're talking about Alabama. There's talent in that room.
Yeah.
And again, DeBoer knows how to utilize and maximize talent. So I understand when people are super excited about Ryan Williams. I'm super excited about him too. He is closer to Devonta Smith than Amari Cooper in terms of size-wise, which, Devonta Smith, again, like you said, won the Heisman, 2,000 receiving yards that year, and he had Sark as his play caller, right? So, now you've got DeBoer, who's an expert play caller, helping out with Ryan Williams and probably going to do his damnedest to get him the ball in space. I do wonder, though, I don't expect Ryan Williams to kind of jump in and be this 1,000-yard receiver. I wonder, and I said this before we started recording, I wonder if they give him the Luther Burden treatment, where Luther Burden at Mizzou, probably going to be the Bolitnikoff Award winner this year, could potentially, depending on the productivity he has this year, could be in Heisman conversations. He's that elite of a talent, right? Mizzou is centering their offense around this dude so much that Dominic Lovett left and went to Georgia. And they didn't exactly light the world on fire his very first year. They kind of slow played it a little bit. They eased him in. They tried to figure out what worked, what didn't. How does he handle this? How does he handle that? And then it was last year that really shot out of a cannon. So I wonder if this year they kind of do the same thing. They really, not a ton of snaps for Ryan Williams. He plays in most games. They get him some catches here and there. They figure out what works, what doesn't. How does he handle the speed? How does he handle the hits? Can he take a big hit? And then once they figure out kind of what they really have, it's his sophomore season that's just that's when it's really, okay, this dude is the dude. He's the 5-star.
I really like the Luther Burden comp a lot. And I think they can have the potential to be very similar players because Luther's not a big, tall guy. He's thicker. But I see a lot of similarities in their game. And to your point about maybe it takes a little bit of time, I think it more takes 7, 8, 9, 10 games as opposed to the entire season to see him. But remember, Devonta Smith was not, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while. As freshman, I don't think he exactly lit the world on fire. So while Devonta never got big, he was muscle bound. He was, every ounce of him was muscle. So that time in the program, in the weight room, nutrition, learning the playbook, all of those things, it might take time for Ryan Williams. But I think we're both confident at some point, whether it's 2024 or 2025, we're going to see the talent there because it's there. It's just a matter of how long it takes to break through.
Yeah. Devonta Smith, his first year, played in all 14 games, only 7 catches, but 3 touchdowns. That was 2017. By 2020, 117 receptions, 1,800 yards, 23 touchdowns. A little ridiculous. Luther Burden, to follow up on that comp, his freshman year, played in 13 games, 45 catches, only 375 yards. And then last year, 86 catches, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. So once they figured out kind of what they had and how to design an offense to maybe feature him a little bit. And granted, Alabama's probably going to have a lot more weapons than Mizzou does, at least in the receiver room. They clearly figured out after that first year, okay, this is the dude that we have. This is what he's good at. Let's spam that and really feature him in this offense. And it clearly paid dividends, right? You paired that with Cody Schrader. Mizzou had a fantastic season last year.
Let's call it what it is. He should still be in high school right now. He reclassified.
17 years old. Yeah. He
17
didn't
years
turn
old.
18 until like February.
So while it might be the best thing for Alabama football to just throw in the ball all the time, it may not be the best thing for Ryan Williams and Alabama football 2025, 26, 27 to just go all in on him right away. Maybe you do if you think, maybe we're better off slow playing it a little bit. He's no doubt going to be among the top 3 most watched players on Alabama in terms of interest, I think. He might be right up there with Jalen Miller just because we don't know what it's going to be, but we know what the potential is.
Last thing I wanted to get to on today's show, we've been unveiling our list of the top 25 most important Alabama players. As of today, Wednesday, June 19th, we have released the 5 guys who missed the cut and then 25 through 18. So number 18 today was Jamarian Latham. Counting down from him, number 19 was Quandarius Robinson. Number 20 was Keanu Cott. 21 was Devonta Smith. 22, tight end CJ Dupree. 23, safety Keon Sabb. 24, receiver Kendrick Law. 25, defensive lineman Tim Smith. And then the 5 guys who missed the cut, punter James Burnip. So much special teams disrespect. Your guy, Red Morgan at safety, Jaheim Otis at defensive line, Kobe Prentice at receiver, and quarterback Ty Simpson. Now, this was a group effort that we went into designing this list. Alex, me, Rodak, and Kirk McNair kind of, combined the minds together to come up with this top 25 list. Not sure that we all agree with where the final list was, but we mostly agreed on everything. Alex, I know you've got some thoughts on some of the guys who just missed the top 25, some of the guys that we have unveiled so far, and some of the other guys that we will continue to unveil in the weeks ahead. How do we feel about the top 25 most important Alabama players as we see them right now, mid-June?
Yeah, there are 2 things. One, I understand philosophically why Ty Simpson is not among the top 25. That said, I think he is definitely worthy of the top 25 because there may not be 10 positions. There are 22 players who start, 11 on defense, 11 on offense. Let's leave there. We'll leave special teams out. You can't tell me that this backup quarterback's not the 23rd best most important player then, because the second Milroe goes down, he is the number 1 most important player. And I think he has a chance to be really good, if not this year, then next year. And we know the style of play that Jalen Milroe has. We know that he's going to take hits. I don't think he's a running quarterback. We throw that label on him. I think he's wants to be in the pocket, but he will run and he will take hits. And we know those accumulate and there's the risk of injury. So to me, Ty is a guy who's very important, not just next season, but this season. The other one that kind of stood out to me, and I understand it, if I could combine Kobe Prentice, who missed the cut, and Kendrick Law, who made the cut so far, into one player, they'd be really high up there because it is what we've talked about, right? We don't know right now what the receiver pecking order is going to look like. And they need at least one of those 2 guys to be a player because they have experience, they have knowledge, they have shown an ability to make plays. And for this offense to be good, it needs to be more than just Jeremy Bernard. I think Jeremy Bernard's going to be a stud. You need a Kendrick Law to be a utility weapon, taking jet sweeps and playing in space. Same thing is true, I think, of Kobe Prentice. He's got that ability as well. If one of those guys plays really well, it unlocks a lot of the receiver in the same way that I think Ryan Williams, if he plays really well, makes everyone else better because the pecking order is then established. Everyone has defined roles instead of just trying to mix and match and then there's no fluidity there. So to me, that's kind of what jumped out. Keon Sabb, another guy who I think probably could have been a little bit higher. I think he has potential to be a really good player. But the receiver dynamic to me is going to be very interesting. It's going to tell a lot, not just about how the season goes, but about whether Jalen Milroe is going to be right back in Heisman contention this year.
I'm pretty high on Kobe Prentice. I've been doing our summer rewatch series and just trying to, review last season in hindsight or with the benefit of hindsight and kind of looking for clues ahead of 2024. And Again, I probably need to watch a little bit more of Washington to try and figure out the true role of the three receivers that they had last year and what could translate to Alabama's offense. And I don't know that it's going to be an exact carbon copy of what they did at Washington last year, but there's going to be some things that they bring over. There's going to be some things that they hold over from last year because Milroe was effective at times. Kobe Prentice is a guy that like probably should get the ball more. I remember thinking that at times last year because he had moments where it's just like, dude, like there's some pop here that not a lot of the other receivers have. Like he, 5 catches for 68 yards against Texas, and then nothing for 3 straight games. And it was just like really weird. And then against Arkansas, 2 catches for 93 yards. He had that really long touchdown. And then 1 catch over the next 2 games. And then like I just got done watching the Kentucky game where he had 4 catches for 74 yards. Like this is a dude that just he seems to have a little bit of an extra bounce in his step. He tends to create yards after the catch. Like there's just a little bit of extra burst there once he gets the ball. Yeah, he was only targeted like 20 times or something like that last year. Now, part of that could be similar role to what Isaiah Bond played last year, which is kind of that slot or that underneath guy because they had Jermaine Burton run deep all the time. I don't want to pick on Tommy Rees because he's not here anymore, but like, clearly the personnel that Alabama had and the offense that he wanted to run just didn't fully mesh all the way. Whereas like DeBoer and Nick Sheridan and Jamarcus Shepard have been very outspoken about like, we are going to mold what we want to do with the personnel and try to exploit their strengths a little bit. And I think a good part of this offense would involve not a heavy dose of Kobe Prentice, but at least more. He just, and I don't know if he just slides into that Isaiah Bond slot role and just carries on, or if he finds a way to play a role similar to what Jalen McMillan played last year. And this just ties into that receiver conversation where it's like, I don't know what it's going to look like. It would have been maybe a little bit easier to picture it if Jalen Hale didn't get hurt, but he got hurt. So here we are. And, are the 3 dudes that they're going to roll out at receiver? Is it going to be Bernard Williams and Kobe Prentice? How much is Kendrick Law going to play? Because Kendrick Law, like we were talking about this before we hit record too, built like Jeremy Bernard, plays a little bit more like Kobe Prentice. So it's like, what are we going to do here? I don't know. I agree with you that I think Kobe Prentice there should have been a spot for him in the top 25. Like he played as a true freshman, clearly explosive, right? He was average, he only had 18 catches last year, but 17 and a half yards per reception, a lot of yak yards. When Jamarcus Shepard is like, yes, I'm excited about this receiver room as he was a couple different times during the spring. I look at a guy like Kobe Prentice who maybe wasn't used, I don't want to say improperly last year, but like probably could have been used a little bit more or been more involved in the offense. And I get it. Like I totally see it. And I would like to see more of Kobe Prentice this year. And I think this is the staff that can do it.
Yeah, the number one thing about the receiver room that stands out is the versatility. And you mentioned it with Kobe. I feel a lot of what you feel about Kobe about K-Law.
Yeah.
Because I love his yard after catch. I love his running ability. And I think he could be a real weapon in terms of like jet sweeps, wildcat, like just move him around a lot and let him make plays. And again, who's going to be the guy that wins out in that? Like I think they're 2 similar guys for potentially one spot. I don't know 100% that's going to work out that way. I just think I feel a little bit stronger about K-Law than you do about Kobe. But again, that was the maddening thing about Alabama's offense last year in the receiver room is every one of those guys had a moment. Jermaine Burton owned Texas A&M. Isaiah Bond had the Auburn moment. Everybody had moments, but no consistency. And I think that's going to be the thing that this staff really tries to generate is not just, find the 4 or 5 best guys and just let them go out there and get some chemistry and make some plays instead of just rotating 8 of them and hoping one of them pops. I think the hope is that who they are coming out of fall camp. And that's sort of well established there.
Every time I talk about this, I always circle back to I have no idea what it's going to look like, which is exciting, but also like I kind of wish I did.
Yeah. So what stood out to you among the top 25 that we've most important that we've talked about outside of the receivers?
I like that. I kind of thought Jaheim Otis in the same way that you think of Kobe Prentice. I thought Otis probably deserves to be on the list in some capacity. I think I've a lot of people have asked, like, does Alabama have a game wrecker on this defensive line? I don't think so. They've got a lot of dudes who can do a lot of stuff, and they're going to have a pretty deep rotation. I don't know that they necessarily have a guy that can take over games, but if they do, I like Tim Keenan potentially. I like Jamarian Latham potentially. I also like Jaheim Otis potentially to be a dude that can do that so long as he's healthy. NFL scouts rave about this guy, just his versatility, his ability to play anywhere on the line, and also just the fact that he is just uber disruptive. He dealt with an injury last year around, right after the Ole Miss game. He tweaked something in practice and just wasn't quite the same. So he wasn't able to build on what was a pretty strong freshman campaign. You hope that he's back healthy this year so that he can continue kind of this upward trajectory that he was on when he was a true freshman. He's got a great story, right? Dropped a few 100 pounds, is really agile and athletic, comes from small town Mississippi. He's probably going to play on Sundays. So we'll see how often and how long he plays on Sundays. But this is a dude that if he's healthy, he could be a game altering force. I don't know that he's like the true, I'm going to take over this game, but like he's going to command a lot of attention from opposing offensive lines, which is going to open up so much more for Tim Keenan, for Tim Smith, for Jamarian Latham, for LT Overton. If he's not healthy, if he can't do that, it just makes life a little bit harder for a defensive line that I think highly of. But if he is healthy and he is that game altering force, it makes a pretty good unit even better, like arguably very good, potentially great. And so I feel like he probably deserved a spot in the top 25. But I understand because of how deep the D-line rotation could be this season that, he was of the five that missed the cut. I don't know. I'm a believer in Jaheim Otis so long as he's healthy.
Yeah, it's a chicken or egg thing, right? Like, I don't think you're wrong to focus on the defensive line. I sort of more look at all the outside backers that are in that initial group of top 25 guys and just the unknown there, that who's going to be the guy that can really put pressure on the quarterback, because they're going to need that. And we didn't see it at A-Day. You talk to people around the program, and there was in practices, I thought it was showing up a lot more. Quarterbacks were facing a lot more pressure in practices, but we didn't see it. So who's going to be the guy who can consistently do that? Because Alabama has been spoiled with that for a long time. Dallas Turner, Will Anderson, most recently. If you can get, it starts with the defensive line. I agree with that, but like you need guys who can make plays, where that's a Keanu Code or whoever it might be. They need somebody to step up in that respect and be one of the 10 most important players on the team, because you've got to have a pass rusher. You got to have a guy who makes the quarterback's life difficult, especially when you're going to face a Nico at Tennessee, a Jackson Dart, a Quinn Ewers. Like, you're going to face some dudes, definitely on the schedule and potentially in the SEC championship game. If they don't have a pass rush, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we saw that from Georgia last year, right? Last year was probably the first time in a long time that they didn't have like a dude in the front seven that could disrupt in the way that like a Jordan Davis or a Jalen Carter could.
Mm-hmm.
And that played into Alabama's benefit, right? Like once they were able to kind of figure out a few things about Georgia's defense, they were able to move the ball pretty effectively. So Alabama's defense for, 17 years under Saban, let's put pressure on the quarterback. Is it going to be different under Kane Womack? Maybe a little bit, but you want that dude who can come off the edge, and especially like the way Dallas Turner did in the fourth quarter of games last year, the way Chris Braswell altered games last year, right? The Tennessee game, blocking the field goal against A&M. He had a pick six against Mississippi State. Maybe Keanu Cock, Quandarius Robinson, they might be the dudes, but there's an argument that they probably could have been a little bit higher in terms of importance to this year's team.
Yeah, it's kind of like quarterbacks, where you can play with two of them and you can create something, but you really want one guy who's going to be the dude in terms of a pass rusher, because of the attention that he's going to seek. And even if he's just a decoy on a play, there's value there. So while I think Alabama can mix and match to create pressure, because there are athletes there, because of the system under Kane Womack, I think lends itself to a numbers game, you need one guy who's just the dude who the other team knows is the dude, because of the ripple effect of that. So I think low-key, one of the more important things to establish this fall is pass rush just overall, because it has such an impact on today's game.
Yeah. And they'll, in the same way that the secondary is going to get tested early on because they play those, open offenses the first 3 weeks of the season, it's also going to be an opportunity for the pass rush. Like, who's that guy? who's
And
going
you
to get
don't want to leave those newcomers on an island.
right.
Speed up the clock, help those rookies out, help those transfers out as they're getting their feet wet. If you give a quarterback 6 seconds in this league, it's going to result in 6 points.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to continue rolling out the top 25 players all the way up to SEC Media Days, which are less than a month out at this point. We're just a few weeks away. We'll all be in Dallas for SEC Media Days, the new expanded SEC Media Days, 16 teams this year. That Brad Crawford believes will end with a 5-way tie for second. That's all we've got on today's show. Alex, appreciate you always taking some time to chat with me once a week. We'll be back again next week. We're going to continue on this once a week deal, probably up until fall camp, and then maybe we'll start to circle back into 2 and then potentially 3 a week once we get into the meat of the season. But in the meantime, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. Believe we're running a special because we're always running a special. You can get a discount on your VIP annual membership. Absolutely take advantage of that right now during the offseason so that you can be ready to go when the season finally rolls around. We're less than a month out from SEC Media Days, which means we're less than 2 months out from fall camp. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening, and we will talk to you all again soon.